Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for this segment, we have Amira Valliani. She's the head of policy at Solana Foundation, here to discuss environmental responsibility and regenerative practices in blockchain technology. Amira, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thanks so much for having me, Jill.
You got it. And let's talk about the new energy use report that was just issued. What were some of the main takeaways?
Sure. So the Solana Foundation has committed to keeping the Solana network, carbon neutral. And that has two components to it. One is accurately measuring the carbon footprint of the network, which is not an easy task when it comes to figuring out how to measure the carbon footprint of blockchain. And so we've worked really closely with a startup that actually is measuring the carbon footprint on a validator by validator level to actually figure out the carbon footprint of the network. And what we found was pretty exciting. So the carbon footprint of the network has actually decreased by about 17% since the last report about 6 months ago. And this is largely driven by a per transaction decrease in energy usage by about 25%. So we're seeing the overall carbon footprint of the network decrease significantly. The other part that's exciting about the report is that as part of our commitment to keeping the network carbon neutral, we measure the carbon footprint of the network, and then we also purchase offsets for the carbon footprint. And for the first time, we have purchased these offsets for the network entirely on chain, which is incredibly exciting to be able to see and be at the tip of the spear of this sort of new burgeoning industry.
And you mentioned a key piece of this report is that carbon credits are being offset on chain. How does this work and why is it important?
Yeah, so I think the best way to start is to understand a bit about carbon markets as it is. So if we're going to achieve globally our carbon or climate goals, we need to do two things. We need to cut emissions and we need to literally suck carbon out of the atmosphere. And carbon markets help provide economic incentives to do both those things. But carbon markets today are really messy. You can imagine it's really difficult to track, for example, whether or not if you buy a carbon credit, maybe it's for land, that land is being preserved over time, or maybe that credit has been sold multiple times. You can't really go to the middle of the Amazon and be able to check those things. And so when I first heard about on-chain carbon credits, I'll admit I was kind of skeptical. I was in the class of, guys, blockchain can't solve everything. But as I learned more about how it works, I said, this is one of the best use cases of blockchain I've ever seen, because it helps create a sense of transparency and accessibility to an industry that is really, really difficult to track. And so there are several vendors out there who do a lot of work creating sort of distributed approaches to measuring potential carbon offsets, taking, for example, maybe a land or city forest credit or ocean alkalinity, measuring that, going through sort of a really rigorous assessment process, bringing that on chain, making sure that very specific credit is not duplicated and the metadata associated with it is unique. And then we purchase those credits, in accordance with whatever the offset is required for the network. And these credits are all highly traceable. They're transparent. You can see the NFT associated with the retirement of that carbon credit. And so it helps create a lot more accessibility and transparency in an industry that's historically really, really difficult to be able to see all that in.
Can you tell us more about some of the regenerative finance projects being built on Solana?
Absolutely. I mean, this is an area that's grown by leaps and bounds over the last couple of years. There are over 100 builders that get on a call every couple of weeks just to talk about how they can collaborate. And they're doing a range of different things. So of course, there's folks who are thinking about new approaches to carbon markets, which we just spoke about. But then there's people, also applying blockchain to, different areas of the climate crisis. So for example, people who use distributed infrastructure to be able to incentivize folks to deploy weather tracking devices in places where it's historically expensive or more difficult to get weather information. And then there's also people, for example, using distributed IoT networks like Helium to track lines in the Masai Mara so they can get much more granular information on the movement of wildlife than you can with traditional radio sensors. So it's really all over the place.
Solana is known to be eco-friendly. Can you talk about why these environmental efforts remain a top priority for the network?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start off by saying they're incredibly important for me and they're incredibly important for a lot of my colleagues at the Solana Foundation. And I think what drew us, a lot of us to blockchain is, we're mission driven. We really believe in the potential of this new technology to be able to create a new, more democratized internet. And the same reasons that we're probably drawn to blockchain are reasons we really care about the climate. If I wasn't working in blockchain right now, I'd probably be in climate. And so I think you see a bunch of mission-driven people out there who really want to figure out how to tackle our carbon goals, our climate-related goals. And we think about the ways that we can do that given the place that we are, right? And everyone has a role to play. And so at the Solana Foundation, we know that we can do this really well for the Solana network more broadly. And we're also excited to work with members of the Solana community who are just coming up with really, really creative ways to address these problems.
And finally, Amira, what are you most excited about looking ahead to 2024 for Solana and the industry as a whole?
So I have seen over the last couple of years, tons and tons of infrastructure be laid down to figure out what it takes to build sort of the next generation uses of blockchain that are really going to make meaningful differences in the lives of consumers. And a lot of these builders have been very quiet over the last couple of years. They've been heads down working. A lot of times the world has looked away, and you're just starting to see these use cases break out. And so I think going into next year, we're going to see some of these use cases really grow. And it's everything from, like I said, on-chain carbon markets to folks using and deploying community-owned 5G networks to create real competition for some of the larger cell networks out there, to people who are taking on secondary ticketing marketplaces and making it so that you can have more accessible approaches to buying concert and comedy show tickets. They're just cheaper. And I think we'll see a lot of these emerge in 2024. So I think it'll be a really, really exciting year for both blockchain and the Solana network.
All right, Amira, we appreciate the insight as always. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thanks so much, Jill.